I finally purchased my first electric vehicle. I have 110 in my garage and I need to run 220 out there. So what do I do and how do I do it? Stay tuned. Well, it's morning time. We're starting to get back and doing some work around the house here. So we're going to get a EV, or also known as an electric vehicle. And we have a detached garage, and right now, as you see, we're running 120 volts into the garage, but for a level 2 charger for the EV, we need a 220 volt. So what we're going to do is run a 220 line from our house and you hear neighbor's dogs barking. So we're going to come out about here, because you see we have a 220 air conditioning wall mounted unit, and we're going to do a manual transfer or changeover switch to be able to go from the air conditioning unit to our EV charger. And we're running from, let's see here, from here to the garage, we're approximately 35 feet. So we're going to be running a buried trench along this line here. From previous installations, we put in a hole here through the concrete, so we're going to take advantage of that. Along with neighbor's dog barking, this is going to be the task here. We're going to use a trenching shovel, and this shovel is, let's see, about a 4.5 inch wide shovel. You can see here we broke our tape measure, so we got to get a new one of those. To give you a quick illustration on what we're going to do is, we have our corner of our house, and in the corner of our house we have the wall air conditioning unit that's sticking out for the basement, and on the opposite side, or over here, we actually have our electrical circuit breaker box. Currently coming off of that is a 220 volt feed that's going through the basement along the perimeter of the wall and going to an outlet to supply 220 volt power to the wall air conditioning unit. We're going to right here tap into that 220 line and add a changeover switch. And that changeover switch is going to allow us to switch from power to the air conditioning unit or power to the garage where the EV will be located. That tie-in, we're showing it here in red, is going to be buried 3-wire plus ground UFC cable going to the garage. And from the garage, we'll be able to recharge our auto. Just an illustration of what we're going to do as far as the trench. The trench is actually going to be, according to NEC, the trench should be 24 inches deep. However, because we're only going 18 inches, we're allowed to go 18 inches with UFC wire, provided that we protect it in a PVC, rigid PVC conduit. So we're going to actually go down 18 inches using the trenching shovel, insert the UFC wire into the PVC conduit, lay that from the garage wall along the buried line to a wall penetration through the house to tie into the existing 220 line. This 220 line has been in there for some years now, so more than likely is actually a 3-line configuration, where here we're actually going to need a 4-wire configuration. So what we're probably going to do is initially just use the 220 2-wire to feed and power our recharge our electric vehicle, but then come back sometime and actually change this out to a 3-wire and actually change the breaker from 20 volts to a 30 volts. And doing that, we can go from a 30-volt breaker using 3 wires plus ground, and then make the transfer here and carry it on to out here. So that's the plan right now. I finally purchased my first electric vehicle, and the question is, how do I charge it other than a 110 outlet, which takes a considerable amount of time to recharge from 0 to 100%. So I'm going to add a 220 line into my garage. My garage is detached from my home, so it's attached by roughly 35 feet. So I'm going to have to run a cable, power line cable from my home to my garage, bury it 18 inches in accordance with code, and I'm going to use a number 10 3 UF cable, which is really rated for 30 amps, but I may just start off initially with a 20 amp circuit breaker, but I'm putting this in as a future modification if I decide to go to 30 amp. With a 30 amp, you need a 10 gauge wire gauge cable, whereas with a 20 amp breaker, you can only use a 12 gauge wire. So in addition to my 3+1, which is the ground UF cable, I have a 3/4 inch PVC conduit fittings that consist of couplings, 90-degree elbows, and a couple of 45s, and a trench shovel. So that's basically it. So it's just a matter of the labor to run that distance of 35 feet. One note, with underground feed cable, you really need to be 24 inches deep to prevent damage to it. However, you can raise it up to 18 inches provided you protect that UF cable. And in my case, what I'm doing, I'm actually inserting it into a 3/4 inch PVC conduit, which allows me to raise it to a depth of 18 inches. Here you see me feeding my 3+1 cable into a LB box. One is going to be located on the wall of the garage and one on the wall of the house exterior. Okay, here's the first one. Sorry, my smartphone audio wasn't picking up clearly. So what I was saying here was I ran into my first issue. I was trying to fish this UF cable 3+1 into a 3/4 inch PVC conduit, and it was very tight. So What I ended up doing was going back to the big box store, returning it, and actually exchanging it for a 1-inch PVC conduit, and it slipped through much easier. You can see here I abandoned the existing hole and decided to drill this higher just for more convenience. Here I'm, after drilling a hole through the masonry wall, I'm just pushing the cable through to just make sure that the diameter is big enough for the cable to slide through. You can see here that the garage is one end of the cable. The other end is actually in my basement, and I have to go through the basement bathroom to the utility room, where you can see that wall is where I'm going to drill and penetrate the cable through. Now standing at the exterior wall of my house, you can see the penetration I made through the basement wall from the utility area to the exterior, and this is going to connect up with my buried trench line. Here as well, I got to make the hole larger to enable my cable to penetrate through. Just as a short break or intervention, you see my neighbor's dogs. That's Milo right there. Milo is chained to a lanyard even though he's in a chain link fenced yard, because Milo has a habit of being a good escape artist. And the other one right there with the blue collar, that's Cody. Both are senior citizens. Cody on the left is in the 90s, and Milo on the right is in his late 60s. So, end of intermission, back to the project at hand. I noticed what a lot of people do is that they put their conduit in and then they try to push their cable through or pull it through. And what I usually like to do, if I can, is try to fish all my cable or wiring through my conduit before I actually put the joints in the end together, and then that way I don't have the trouble of trying to go from point A to point B, trying to push or pull cable through. So that way I have most of my cable already inserted into my conduits. Right about now I'm probably into this project here for maybe about 3,000. Right about now I'm probably into this project for about $300 to $350. I had gotten quotes from two contractors, one for $1,100 and one for $1,800, with the majority of the work being the trenching and running the cable from the house to the garage. So I think I'm saving on this. Got a few more hundreds to spend. Have an electrician come in and do all the final hookups. That should cost a little bit, but again, it's going to be much less than the total $1,100 and $1,800 I was quoted originally. Oh, by the way, those quotes were pre-pandemic also. Everything has been filled back in. The only thing you see now is just the pop-ups out of the ground near the walls of the garage and the house, along with the exposure of the caution red electrical warning tape. So now I just have to call an electrician to do my final hookups and checking of my connections and my breaker box work. Check out my separate videos as I do the final hookups in the garage and in the basement. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.